kites rise highest against the wind, not with it. This is the Kite Flyers Podcast.
My guest today and the first guest of the Kite Flyers podcast is Peter Brennan, the co-founder and chief creative officer at Heaps Normal, described as an independent, non-alcoholic beer company creating the new normal when it comes to beer drinking. Heaps Normal began only in 2020 and now is one of the leading independent, non-alcoholic beer brands in Australia. If I don't say so myself, it's the best. I've tried a whole bunch and it's just perfect. He's also the founder and creative director at the branding and design studio Electric and Analog. So I'm happy to have you here today, Pete.
Thanks, mate. Good to be here.
Very good, very good. Now I do want to jump into things. Obviously, this is the first episode of the series, so I'm still working my way through how this is all going to work, and the listeners listening to this for the first time are going to be on that fun ride for me. But the premise of the show is to really understand how businesses, kites, have grown in the face of obstacles, being the wind. And I was really interested about meeting you and the Heaps Normal brand because I spoke to a few friends of mine and I said, what's a very difficult category that someone seemed to have been able to grow in or shine in? And a number of people said not only is it a difficult category, it's somewhat of a new category, and that's the non-alcoholic kind of range or category in itself, and that I need to speak to you. So you come highly recommended, and
I hope I don't let you down, mate. This is
no.
some big expectations, but I hope you get your money's worth.
Yeah. Well, listen, if your beer sets any precedent, then I'm quite happy to jump into this. So how about we start with the current state of affairs? How about we start with some rough numbers? How big is the market for low and non-alcohol at the moment, and what is your competitive position within it? What's your market share? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, the category itself is still very much in its infancy stages. We started smack bang in the middle of COVID. We're not even 3 years old yet as a business. The competitive landscape was we had some competition when we started. There's brands like Sober out there who've kind of been there before us, and but it was we came at it from a slightly different angle. We kind of looked at this whole thing and went, okay, well, we don't want to preach sobriety and drive that story home. We want to almost create a subcategory within the non-alc space where we say we make beer for people who really enjoy a beer but want to cut down for whatever reason. That could be because they're driving for the night. It could be because they're taking a sabbatical, taking 6 months off the booze or whatever it might be. And we found a lot of success of people kind of drinking in between having a normal beer. So going out and having 8 beers instead of having 8 alcoholic beers, 4 of them alcoholic, and every second beer becomes a Heaps Normal. So it's been an interesting journey, and the landscape is definitely getting some more players involved, which is great because it really kind of confirms that we were barking up the right tree when a lot of people said no. It's still really early days, and I think there's a lot of growth in the category for sure.
It sounds like it. I was reading in my research before this that I think it was AB InBev and a few of the other major players are saying that within the next few years, 20 to 30% of their portfolio is going to be in the lower non-alc space. And we've obviously seen this massive growth happening since your inception. The amount of competitors in the space is just kind of growing astronomically. So you're definitely on that wave, it sounds like. I think it's worthwhile, especially for those who haven't heard the Heaps Normal story before, to add context, or it'll help us add context to why you've been able to succeed and grow, I think, is to hear your story about Heaps Normal, how you got involved with it, how the team, the Voltrons all came together and formed Heaps Normal. It'd be great to hear the impetus to all this. Let's
Oh
throw
yeah,
that.
absolutely, man. So yeah, I wear my heart on my sleeve with this stuff. So this is not a sob story by any means, but it's definitely my truth. I mean, my background's in branding. I'm a designer by trade. I still run a branding studio, and we build brands for startup founders, typically in consumer and technology space. So a few years into running a branding studio, I had a little bit of imposter syndrome. We had a pretty corporate client that was a little bit difficult. I started kind of looking at our process of how we create a brand from start to finish, what that looks like, and thought, okay, well, let's create a brand of our own. That's, we don't have a client telling us what to do, and just see kind of how that works out. So, that for me was a real kind of look inside the branding studio and refining our process. I guess, on a personal level, my dad was an alcoholic. I lost him to suicide when I was 11. I grew up in the shadow of that my whole life. When, throughout my 20s, I would very much say I didn't have a good relationship with alcohol myself as well. Grew up, born in England, grew up in South Africa, moved back to London, kind of early 20s, and spent, the best part of a decade, in and around pubs as you do in England, because it's kind of like a national sport over there, is having a beer over a meeting or a breakfast or whatever you might do. And then, met my now wife, moved to Australia 11 years ago. We had our first child, Frankie, about 7 years ago. And I started really having a look in the mirror about why why I have this relationship with alcohol, considering the history of my family. So, started trying to piece together a bit of a brand around a non-alcoholic beer company. Got kind of an MVP of this brand down, started knocking on the doors of a bunch of breweries in and around Sydney through introduced by mutual friends. And there just wasn't an appetite for it. I was politely laughed out of the boardroom, and this is never going to work, and why would anyone drink a non-alc beer? And but I couldn't let it go. I just thought there was something in it. I traveled a bit to in the months preceding that as well. I'd spent some time in Tokyo for work, and LA as well, and noticed, like, a lot of the younger people moving away from alcohol, like drinking kombucha, but microdosing on cannabis and things like that, and really kind of moving away from the alcohol consumption, which was an interesting thing for me. So, just kept knocking on doors, and I guess there's that salesman inside of me somewhere that, for every no you get closer to a yes. And so it was lots and lots of no's. And then, I met a man named Andy Miller, who's now the CEO of Heaps Normal and my business partner. And he was the first one who kind of looked at me and heard me out and just kind of got it. He just went, I understand. Like, he spent a lot of time in China growing up, and, fascinated by culture change, and really saw this as a challenge. And he'd grown up in the beer industry as well. So knew what a real impact alcohol consumption has on people, and the effect it has on people's lives. So so we kind of put our heads together. We needed, someone to make the beer. So we hit up Benny Holdstock, who's another co-founder and our head of product. So he's essentially a brewer by trade, and is responsible for the liquid tasting so good. And then we needed someone else, so we reached out to a friend of mine named Geordie Smith, who's a professional surfer out of South Africa. And he kind of got it too. He's come runner up to being a world champ twice and wanted a bit of a competitive advantage, and it was all in as well. So the four of us incorporated and launched smack bang in the middle of COVID, against the advice of everybody else. But we thought we had something, and the first production run, Benny essentially made a kind of home brew in his kitchen in a small kind of homebrew setup. And I tasted it and thought, oh God, this tastes horrible. This is never going to work. But him being a brewer could call out the flavors and the taste, and knew it was going to be good when it kind of all the pieces came together. So we trusted him, implicitly, and we went into production with Brick Lane, who's our brew partner, and we made 1,200 cans. They were blank silver cans. We couldn't afford to print on the cans at the time, so we kind of put these handmade stickers on in my kitchen upstairs here with my wife and my kids on a small production line. And we started shopping them around to, like restaurants and, friends in the industry and hospitality and, bar staff and restaurant managers and things like that. And we're just overwhelmed by the response. People would crack this plain silver can with a Heaps Normal sticker on, not knowing what kind of beer it was, or, just us saying, hey, we've made a beer. And the feedback was amazing. And people called it as kind of like a 5% XPA. And we were like, that's cool, but it's got zero alcohol. And then we saw jaws hit the floor, and we looked at each other and went, okay, we're onto something here. And scaled our first production run, and kind of went from there. And we're, like I said, we're kind of nearly 3 years in now, and it's just going from strength to strength, which is super exciting.
Wow. Wow. That's it's exciting stuff. We've got we're in the I might have shared this before we spoke. Uh my wife and I have been working on an RTD organic iced tea. And just hearing
Awesome.
your story, you guys are obviously 3 years ahead. We've only just launched it, but to hearing some of the early stages of having the wraparound label that you're sticking on, and then just knocking on doors and seeing what people think of it, I think it's great to hear. Um, Going back to those early, that first run, and even before that first run, did you guys have a? So obviously, I understand the purpose behind creating Heaps Normal. I understand the reasons why you'd want to change what is normal in the lives of Australians and people around the world in terms of the drinking culture. But from a commercial perspective, there obviously has to be a degree of opportunity in it for you to kind of match the mission with the purpose, or the profit and the purpose, either way you want to look at it. Uh, did you guys have a plan or a go to market in mind of saying, okay, well, for this to work, we need to get X amount of businesses on board. We want to target these types of businesses. We're not going to go retail. We're going to go small venue. These are the challenges or obstacles that we think might be in the way. How formalized was that, or was it just, let's just see if anyone likes this? Like, what did that early kind of plan look like?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, we did have a bit of a plan. I mean, it's it would be, I'd be lying if I said it was a cement kind of document that we all kind of chipped in and built out. But early stage, our mission was to change drinking culture. It still is. So that was kind of something that we, really just held, real dear in our hearts, and a real kind of a real strong purpose, for each of us having those different reasons. Our first kind of, step outside of the four of us building this thing was to go and just chat to those independent restaurants and bottle shops, the real indies. We knew we'd fall over if we went too big too soon and too hard. So we went pretty small scale to begin with. We kind of reached out to, like I said, friends of the family and our network, and got Heaps Normal kind of into the hands of those sommeliers and those restaurateurs and those cool, trendy restaurants where you'd kind of like to be seen hanging out, and got immense buy-in from them at that early stage. Like, I think the category has always been there. I think there's been a lot of things that have worked in our favor since we incorporated. I mean, as heartbreaking as it is to say it, COVID really worked for us. I think, the first lockdown, people went to the bottle shop and stocked up at home and just drank through it. And then the second lockdown, they went, we can't do that again. We need to kind of rethink this. And we were just poised to be there. So, our go-to market strategy was to, just identify those key areas where we thought we would get some cut through. But, realizing the scale of our business at that time was 4 people. Like, there's only so much you can do with a small team. And it's really worked. I think working with independents and the smaller indie market kind of outlets out there is a really good way to get in front of the bigger players, because we stayed away from the supermarkets and the chains for as long as we could. We were actually told pretty early on, we'll have to get 3 to 4 years run on the board. We'll have to they'll haggle us down on price, and our experience of that was totally different. Like, they I think 8 months in, they kind of, we got an email from both of the big kind of supermarket chains and the drinks, the mastheads that go along with those brands, and asking if they could stock us. And initially we said, hey, we'll fall over if we go from a handful of a couple of hundred stores into thousands overnight. And they understood that, and they worked with us. So we've kind of gradually over the months scaled up with those retailers. But I think just going in kind of those independent channels real early on is what's allowed us to really think build that brand and get cut through with those kind of consumers that we wanted to reach out to.
Were there any challenges or obstacles that you didn't anticipate that you found once you went into market? Were there certain things you're like, I didn't expect people to say no to that, or have an issue with that, or I would, anything along those terms?
the challenges we did have early on was people just not understanding it because it was such an early phase in that category. So I couldn't tell you the amount of pubs we got laughed out of. And, there was one in particular where we walked in and, the publican didn't realize we're non-alcoholic, and we started the conversation and we cracked a sample can and gave it to him, and he drank it and said, "Oh, this is delicious and this will go really well." And he said, "What ABV is it?" And we said, "Oh, it's a non-alcoholic." And he literally spat it on the floor and told us to get out. So there was a couple of those that happened early on. Funnily enough, those customers came back a few months later and said, "Hey, can we get Heaps Normal in?" And we said, "Of course you can." I think the main thing was kind of just the consumer or even the buyer just being uneducated in a market that's really, really early on, really very much in its infancy stage, when there's no data to pull, there's no historical data of how products like this have gone over the months and the years before that. So that was probably the biggest challenge, is just kind of educating people on why we're doing it.
That makes sense. So you have this somewhat of the beginning stages of a category still in development. And at the same time, you do have, from what I have read, there was other players in the market like Carlton Zero and a few others that were around. So you have kind of these big players in this market that's still kind of working its way out. The consumer's still trying to understand what it is, do I like it, and so forth. With the category being what it was, and in some ways still is, in terms of who the competitors are, how young the market is in terms of being established. How did you think about separating yourself from the competitors and standing out in order to give you the best chance in order to grow as things move forward?
Sure. Got it. Perfect. So, I mean, look, there's always going to be competition in something like that we do. The bigger players, I mean, I think, just understanding the craft beer market, like people who typically drink craft beer are probably not going to go and drink Carlton and Heineken. It's a different flavor profile. It's a different consumer. So we were very clear that we were playing in that kind of craft beer space. So, to give you some context on that, the brands like craft beer companies like Grifter, for example, and Filter, and and those guys, they stock Heaps Normal behind their bar, which is quite unique because we're the only brand that's not their brand that's behind their bar in their own brew house. So for us, that allowed us to kind of go, okay, hang on a minute, there's something here. We can play in this space without kind of offending those guys that have been there, the alcoholic craft beer companies. And then, looking at kind of more of the mainstream stuff, early on when you start a business and then you see a big player come and do something, the initial reaction is kind of like, oh no, they beat us to it and they're going to have deeper pockets and do it better than we can. But, for what we're doing with Heaps Normal, like, man, it was just such a benefit having those bigger brands play in that space, because one, it's really just driving home the proof of concept. Like, yes, we're onto something here. But two, it creates category awareness. Heineken spend a fortune, I'd imagine, sponsoring the Grand Prix. And that's Heineken Zero. So, that's kind of educating the consumer on the non-alc space. And that works wonders for us, because once people go into the bottle shops and they kind of scan the shelves and they see what's on there, they eventually find Heaps Normal. Now, like I said, we weren't the first. There's definitely other non-alc beer companies out there in the craft space as well. But, I'd like to think we did things quite differently from a brand perspective and a product perspective too. For example, with the brand, the brand's a real nostalgic play. Like, the goal for me was that you are sitting around a barbecue, or you're at the bar, you're at the pub with your mates, and you're holding this can of Heaps Normal. Like, I didn't want people to feel alienated and someone go, hey, why are you not drinking today? Like, what's wrong with you? Because I'd had that myself, the amount of times I'd use an ear infection and being on antibiotics and couldn't drink, just because I didn't want to have to explain myself was kind of crazy. So, just really kind of understanding, like, why we're doing it, and doing it for the right reason. And people buy into that, when they hear the story, they resonate with it. They find their own meaning in the product and the brand. And then obviously, the brand is what kind of attracts people. And then once they crack the can and taste it, they can't quite believe it's non-alcoholic. So, it's kind of been the sum of all parts for us.
Yeah, I did my own research on it myself. Don't worry. And yeah, just those two things. You look at the marketing playbook. You think about the brand, the positioning, the product itself. You seem to have nailed everything. Just feels so perfectly aligned and yet different, and it connects to so many different things. So I think it sounds like you've done something great, and it tastes
Thank
great.
you,
So
man.
you're definitely on something there. Moving forward a bit, uh, since then, so this is only a few years ago, July 2020, I believe you launched.
Yep.
Today, obviously, you guys are one of the leaders in the non-alc beer space in Australia, especially in the craft space. Uh, did you have a hockey stick moment of growth, or was it kind of just gradually growing all the way along?
Yeah, there were a few milestones. It's funny, when you look at like those hockey sticks, kind of, I think sometimes you zoom in and it goes up and down and up and down and up and down. When you zoom out, it looks great
Is
because
it?
it's going up. So there's yeah, it's definitely an emotional roller coaster with things like that, because it's either like, I think ask any startup entrepreneur, and it's either the best day of your life or you want to jump off a bridge. It's one of those two extremes. There were a few key milestones though. I think one of the early real big kind of game changers for us was getting into StartMate. StartMate's an accelerator program run by Blackbird Ventures here in Australia. Essentially, Australia's answer to Y Combinator. You go in there. It was I believe it was a 12-week process. They invest some money and you have access to a series of mentors, and just get taught how to do things efficiently about running a business, like how to market properly, how to sell, how to run a meeting properly and efficiently, and how to work remotely and things like that. So that really helped us. We as per kind of Shark Tank Dragon's Den, you kind of have this kind of pitch day afterwards called demo day, where you get up on stage and you tell your story and you ask for some money with your hand out and a smile. And I think we raised $1.3 million off the back of StartMate on demo day. And that really kind of was the first time we'd actually got a big chunk of money into the business that allowed us to really focus on production and finally be able to pay for printed cans as opposed to hand putting stickers on them, which was great. So that was a real big moment earlier on. There's been a number of those moments since, from getting into flagship venues, getting knocked on the doors by the likes of Dan Murphy's and the bigger players that want us to be in there on their shelves, which has been great. We did a raise the end of 21 as well to build a brewery. So we're currently building a brewery, which is a huge exciting project that we're all working towards at the moment. So yeah, there's been a few of those moments where things happen at the time. You might not think this is a big game changer, but you look back at it with hindsight, and you're like, man, if that thing didn't happen the way it did, we probably wouldn't be where we are at the moment. So it's it keeps you on your toes for sure.
Yeah, I bet. Dancing like a butterfly, stinging like a bee. I like it. Now that's interesting. StartMate is typically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there is typically more so a tech-based sort of
Accelerator, yeah.
accelerator. Yeah. Uh, what drew you guys to StartMate? And I don't even know if there are alternatives for that for the CPG world. So what kind of drew you towards StartMate?
We actually got invited to. It's quite a funny story. Nick Crocker is one of the partners at Blackbird, and he's good friends with Andy, and said, "Hey, you guys should just apply to get into StartMate." He's like, "You'll never get in because we only take consumer brands, but just the application process, the questions you get asked, just formulating those answers, you guys will probably learn a lot about yourselves and probably learn about your business and get some value that way." So we kind of attacked this application process, more of as a learning curve for us to try and understand ourselves a bit better, trying to understand why we're doing what we're doing, really trying to get some insight that way. And yeah, we answered them as best we could, and we click submit, and we thought, well, that's the end of that. Like, we're never going to get in. They take tech accelerators, tech startups, like you mentioned. But we got invited to do like a speed networking kind of program with a bunch of mentors. So that was kind of like a 3-hour session where we had 15 minutes with a bunch of investors and mentors, and some incredible people like Simon Griffiths from Who Gives a Crap, and Kate Morris from Adore Beauty, and Danny Millen from Koala and Milk Run, and some, just awesome people who have walked this walk well before we have, that, have really proved themselves, and got to get in front of them. And we got selected to get in out of, I think they had 700 plus startups apply, and they chose 12. So we were kind of overwhelmed to get into that. And like I said, it was really just a game changer for us. At that point in time, we'd had this idea. We kind of knew what the three of us were going to do in terms of our skill sets and our areas of kind of expertise. But, getting into that program really just allowed us to step outside of our own little brains for a little while and kind of look at how it's best done and how to do this properly. And again, the networking effect has been huge as well. So yeah, really grateful that we got into Startmate.
Sounds quite pivotal. And how did you deploy that first bit of funds then? So you said you moved obviously to the print on can. Was there anything else? Did you think about different distribution channels or bring on different people?
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting one for us because we're one of those brands that, like I think typically brands are either a wholesale brand or they're a D2C brand. And we're kind of this weird mix of both, which kind of goes a little bit against the grain. So yeah, we kind of, we took, the bit of investment money that Startmate provided, and then, the raise that we did off the back of that. And we put that to good use. We did a couple of early key hires of gaps that we had in the team, and we doubled down on production, like I said, and was able to kind of print a better looking can that kind of worked a bit more in our favor. And you double down on kind of some marketing initiatives and things like that as well, that allowed us to kind of get away from the starting points and really kind of become like kind of a real business that's spending money in the right places and getting traction and getting buy-in from people, and building a brand that we think is really making a difference in people's lives. So it's it's a lot of fun.
What's it like today? So you said at the start, there were when you first launched only a few years ago, the awareness in market was quite low, and a lot of some of the buyers didn't exactly know what to do with you, where to put you, and so forth. How has things changed today, and how much has it changed, or is there still a long way to go for you?
Yeah, look, I think those early days were very different than now. I mean, early days, it was 2.5 years ago. It's almost yesterday, Something like this wasn't a decade ago. But the categories. I mean, you can see, man. There's specific non-alcoholic bottle shops and restaurants around there these days, which is just incredible. Like, it's definitely mature, but I think there's still so much space to grow. This is something that I think people are just like I said, with COVID, I think people are really becoming aware of what they're putting in their body. Really had some time to reflect and, look in the mirror a little bit and realize the importance of, not overindulging in things that we know are bad for us. So that's been really helpful. I mean, there's just been so many moments that have just kind of made us realize that, I don't think this is going away anytime soon. I don't think this is a fad. I think this is a new way of people living their lives. And, just being conscious of what they consume. That health and wellness trend in general is just exploding, as I'm sure you're aware. Meditation and eating the right foods and getting the right sleep, and on top of this, mental health. The mental health conversation is the best it's ever been. From my point of view at the moment, like I often think back to losing my dad and what he did, and there wasn't even internet around then, like yet alone like kind of platforms to, talk to people and talk about how you're feeling and ask for help and things like that. So it's definitely, I think there's a number of things at play that are really playing well into the non-alc space. And it's, we're a few years in, and I think there's a lot of growth to come. Yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah, it looks like it. And kudos to everything that you've done. You, as the culture is changing, you're creating the beer for the new culture. I think it's amazing. And from what I've read, the growth is trajectory. The trajectory is going up. I think at the moment it's 1%, the non-alc of the market, and it's look in the next couple of years to be 2%. And alcohol related beverages is in decline. So non-alc's going up at a rapid rate, and alc's going down. And seems to be.
Who would have thought it?
Who would have thought it? But you guys are on that wave. But that must bring new challenges, right? I mean, new competitors, new challenges altogether. Even this new investment that you've got and you've deployed to create your own brewery, that's got to set up its own degree of obstacles. What do the challenges and obstacles look like today?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, we're a team of nearly 30 people now. I think we've got 25 staff at the moment. There's constantly challenges with growth. It's very much the chicken and the egg. Like, we need to hit a few key milestones before we take on a few key people. Like I said, we're building this brewery at the moment. There's constantly challenges with that. I think, in terms of the category, I personally love that there's more competitors coming into the space. I think, coming at this thing from an abundance mindset, I think there's enough to go around for everybody. And I think also, like any endeavor, just being conscious of what you can control. Like, we can't control how many people want to start their own non-alc drinks company tomorrow. And I don't see any value personally in kind of worrying too much about that. I think if anything, it just tells us that we're on the right, we're doing the right thing. And, really kind of trying to win on brand and product on our own, and controlling the things that we can control. So yeah, it's great, man. It's just great to see, there's restaurants that are opening up that don't stock alcohol. There's bottle shops that like only sell non-alcoholic bottle shop. Like, if I told my granddad that 15 years ago, he would have told me to get out the room. He would have just been like, what are you talking about? That's never going to happen. But it's happening, and it's awesome to see. So, yeah, I just love it when people take a swing and, do something and come out on top and have a go at it. I think it's awesome.
Imagine a pub with no pokies and no alcohol.
I mean, it's happening, right? Like, what a time to be alive.
What a time to be alive. and yeah, it makes sense, right? All the compounding effect of having so many new competitors coming into the space just builds category awareness, which can only serve you guys in the long run. So that's tremendous. Okay, well then I suppose the last question I kind of have on all this is, if someone today was looking to do what you've done, and they're in a category that maybe it's still in its infancy, what advice would you give them?
Oh man, I think, like I said, just swing the bat. I think we get too bogged down in kind of the scaries. What if it doesn't work out? What if it goes wrong? And I think that, I would hate to even imagine the number of missed opportunities out there of people who haven't even tried. I think, it's that Henry Ford quote. If I asked them what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. I think we just don't realize what we want until we have the option to see it, to try it and use it and consume it. And so, if anyone wanted to, start something, just it's that constant kind of test and learn loop. It's create something that you think is going to work for whatever reason that is, and maybe not going all in, but just getting some sort of validation that it's gonna, you're not crazy and you're not living on an island and completely removed from reality. But getting that early kind of buy-in and understanding, and then just tweaking and realizing what the market wants, and being able to be adjustable and adapt accordingly, so that you can provide something that's going to give value to people. I mean, that's the whole premise of where we've come from, is like, we've never said alcohol's a devil, don't drink. And we've never preached sobriety. We've always just said, hey, we're here if you're driving tonight, or if you're taking some time off the booze, then there's an option for you. And I think not being preachy about it, I think just being there as an option, and allowing people to kind of try it and figure out their own relationship with why you do what we do, really work for us. But it's got to be grounded in purpose. Like, I think too many people look at a growth category and go, oh, we can make money here, let's do something here. It can't be fun for financial reward. It's got to be a deeper why and a deeper purpose, and a deeper meaning of why you're doing what you're doing. Because when you're not making money and it's 3:00 in the morning and you're working through a presentation, that purpose and that why, for me, is the thing that pushes you to complete that job and get that thing done, as opposed to just going, hey, we've been swinging this thing for months and there's no financial return yet. Because that happens a lot, man. Like, it sometimes takes a while to find product market fit. And I think being a little bit naive and not realizing the consequences of this thing failing has really helped me. I just couldn't take no for an answer. I was like a dog with a bone. It was just, there was no way this wasn't going to go forward, no matter how many people told me to get out the room because it was a silly idea. So I think, yeah, just being a little bit naive, really believing in why you do what you do, having a real solid purpose. I mean, I say this quite a lot, but like the amount of people like that message us on Instagram and go, hey, my husband used to be this horrible drunk and, now he drinks Heaps Normal and, our marriage is back on track. Like that kind of thing for me is just like, oh man, like, like we're doing something because we wanted to scratch our own itch, but it's actually like making a difference in other people's lives as well, which is just like, you can't really put money on that for me, like the fact that like, we get kind of like, I mean, it sounds weird. Like you get stopped in the street from people going like, oh, you're the guys from Heaps Normal. And you kind of get reluctant. You go like, yeah, we are. Cause you don't want to be like that guy. But, they tell you their story about their brother who had a drinking problem and now drinks Heaps Normal. And, he's like achieving in his sport or his line of work, whatever that might be. There's so many of those stories that we get like so often that just, really just bring it home for me and just make me realize like, all those late nights behind us and inevitably ahead of us as well are going to be worth it because we're doing something that's, it means something to people besides ourselves. And it's really making a difference. So I think, yeah, having that purpose is probably the most important thing for me.
It sounds so, well, thanks for sharing that. And it does sound so critical to why you've been able to succeed where others perhaps with maybe great products, maybe even great brands in the non-alc space haven't been able to grow and succeed in themselves. You have an undeniable reason for what you're doing, and it's now become bigger than yourself. That reason, which is wonderful.
Yeah, thanks, mate.
Did you have any doubts? Was there any point that you had doubts like, is this shit actually going to work? And I've got these kids at home. Was there any point of doubt?
Look, I think there always is doubt that creeps in, but I think surrounding yourself with the right people, consuming the right content. I read something years ago, FAIL stands for first attempt in learning, so, yeah, I mean, there's always doubt, but it's for me, it's the regret of not doing it that's even worse than it not working out. I remember Gary Vaynerchuk years ago saying something in one of his videos about like, ask an old person on their deathbed, ask them questions and realize that regret is the worst thing ever. So I'd rather swing the bat and fail than think that will be cool, but never actually get around to doing it. And then, always wonder what would happen if we did have a crack at that. So swing that bat out there, guys, take a swing and give it a crack. Cause you never know.
You never know. All right. Well, on that note, I think we should, we'll wrap it up. Thank you very much for your time, Peter. I appreciate it. Thanks for sharing some of your challenges and I commend you on what you've been able to do and the team have been able to do. And I look forward to seeing all the great things that you guys go out and create for us in this changing world as we move forward.
Thanks, Fab. It's been cool chatting with you, man. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Thanks for being on it, mate.